Hi, I'm Barb.
And I'm Alex.
And we're Enchanterium. And we broke up. But not with each other, because we're sister. We're not dating. We meant our boyfriends. No more boyfriends. But we're here to celebrate Valentine's Day anyway. One of our dolls is getting married on Valentine's Day, and for this occasion, we want to invite all of you to celebrate with us. We also decided to invite a special guest, Diana TheDollFairy.
Hi! Happy Valentine's Day, everyone!
Some time ago, we reached out to Diana to do a Smart Doll collaboration, and the theme we agreed on is Fantasy Wedding. As it turned out, we designed totally different characters that can represent two sides of love: selfless love and sensual desire.
I'm creating a pure and angelic unicorn bride with a sweet and loving expression, representing unconditional love and altruism.
As a contrast to Diana's character, we'll be making a seductive succubus who makes people desire each other, like a Cupid, but a bit more naughty. This project went through a lot of changes and plot twists, but let's get to it. Let's start the outfit with a bodysuit made out of this stretchy mesh fabric. As a reference, I looked at the Iris Incense gown by a Polish designer, Askasu. I'll be using a pattern by Raccoon's Rags, a link to which you can find in the description down below. I'm cutting out all of the pieces, but with some slight modifications. I used the left back piece twice to accommodate for a different back closure that I have in mind, and I brought up the neckline a little bit higher because I will want to add a turtleneck to the bodysuit. I'm doing my best to not shift the fabric, making use of some bits and bobs to serve as pattern weights. I'm slowly going around the contours of the pattern pieces with my rotary blade. I will start by hemming the sleeves with a simple straight stitch. I'm cutting the excess seam allowance to neaten up the look as the mesh is not solid. Next, I joined the front and backs at the shoulders, trim the excess, joined the front and the back at the side seams. Psych! I went back to add the sleeves first. Now we can get back to sewing the side seams along with closing up the sleeves in one go. Now, at this point, a very sad thing happened. I fit the bodysuit on the doll for maybe 5 minutes. And the next day, we noticed black marks over the body of the doll, which led me to believe that the fabric was staining, both the plastic and the vinyl pieces, which seemed odd. We decided to change the concept of the whole doll for something more traditional, or just white. And I started working on an iridescent gown, for which I made like 10 meters of bias tape by hand and sewn it onto many pieces of fabric, but it ended up looking meh. In the meantime, the little scientist that I am, I ran another stain test on the Cortex hand after an additional washing of the fabric, and it didn't seem to stain, which at the end I found out that it actually still did. So desperate to finish this project on time, we went back to the flushed out black gown idea that we had from the beginning. Now you can see I added a pantyhose lining to the bodysuit to minimize any more potential staining, and I changed the sleeves by adding a circular flounce to them. You can see the turtleneck is already attached, but I basically repeated what I've already done with the first bodysuit. Let's get back to it. I have excess pantyhose on the edges because it's easier to sew it that way. I just trim it after making my seam. To hem the leg holes, I first zigzag an elastic to the wrong side along the edge. Next, I fold it over and zigzag again. It gives a nice and elastic hem. Now, I'm partially going to sew the back and hem the top part of it to make the closure there. I can now remove the pink stay stitching that was holding the nude layer to the mesh. Next, I'm going to iron on a decorative border to the back edges. I cut it out on the Cricut, out of my favorite glitter iron-on from Arteza. I'm going to add these beads on one side. I couldn't find the direct translation of the stone's name, but I read they call it the Norwegian moonstone sometimes. I'm sewing one bead in every flower and the iron-on. These are going to be buttons. On the other side, I'm going to add loops with this round elastic for shirring. After sewing the crotch seam, we can see how the buttons work. I forgot to add in the hole for the stand while making the suit, but I'll add it back later. Now, what is a gown without a nice big skirt? I made some bias tape for the waistband and added it to 3 layers of circle skirts made from the same mesh as the bodysuit. After fitting, I noticed that the skirt overlaps itself a little too much, so to manage that, I took out a little bit of the mesh on both ends of the tape and resewn the bias binding. Then, I blended the mesh with the edge to keep the volume at the bottom. The skirt is going to be held by 2 rings. I added them to the right side of the tape and stitched the tape under. As simple as that. To put it on, you put the belt through both rings and then back through the left ring.
For this project, I'm going to use a Mirai Cortex head in milk. First, I sanded down some imperfections around the jaw. Then I'm trying to make her eye holes a bit smaller, which will suit a seductive character better. I'm using epoxy sculpt to extend the top eyelid. I'm trying to smooth the epoxy with a silicone tool and water. I also tried to sand the new eyelids with sandpaper, but the difference in the materials made it very difficult, so the transition is not seamless. To paint the face, I'm going to use an airbrush. I first primed the head with 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear and then started airbrushing. I'm not an expert at this technique, I use it very rarely, but I decided that I can't risk the brush strokes on this face. The paint came out a bit too light and yellow, but it's better this way. I can always add blush and some contour to the face later. You can see the difference in the eye shape here. I think it's much more fitting for a succubus than the original shape. Let's move on to the face-up. I'm starting with chalk pastels and delicate contouring of the eyes and ears. So far, we've only shown you one custom smart doll, and she has a pretty unconventional face-up. I was afraid to make the first proper smart doll face-up on video, so I practiced on some other heads first. Meet Aqua, who has a Cortex Mirai head in milk, and a named character that has a vinyl Cheetos head in cinnamon. For this girl, I prepared a quick digital concept sketch, very pink and sweet, but with a confident smile. I decided to make the heart on her right cheek full and the other one broken. After the first layer of watercolor pencils is finished, I sprayed it with MSC, waited around 30 minutes and started the new layer with pastels. I recently bought some cheap makeup brushes and they work really well on doll faces too. I'm adding brown and burgundy freckles because the texture of her skin after all the paint and sealant is not perfect, and I thought they might cover it. I usually do freckles anyway, but in this case I felt like it was necessary. Painting smart dolls is so much faster than dolls without inside eyes. I don't have to constantly check if the eyeballs are looking in the same direction, and the symmetry of the eyes is already sculpted, so it was a simple and fun process. For the brows, I'm using pastels first and then adding individual hairs with watercolor pencils. Although I like how the red lashes look, I was afraid that the eyes won't be visible from a distance, so I decided to darken everything on the upper eyelid with a black pencil. I wanted to try faking the whites of the eyes in the outer corners, and I started with a white watercolor pencil. I really like adding white to my face-ups, it brings so much light and everything looks sharp and fresh after I finish. The last step is Pearl powder, this time 1 layer of macro pearl and 2 layers of rose gold powder. Time for the eyes. I designed these pink/red irises with little hearts as catchlights. I'm adding some more detail by hand. I sprayed them twice with MSC, but as you can see, it was not enough protection and the pencils got smudged during adding a layer of matte varnish. Then I'm placing a glass cabochon on top with craft glue. This is how they look. I couldn't find a doll eye putty and I ran out of glue tack, so I placed the eyes with the paper medical tape. It works, but I can't say I recommend this method. And this is how she looks with the eyes.
I was planning to create a big necklace, inspired by the Serena necklace from Season 7 of Archer. So I decided to make similar looking gemstones with rhinestones, caviar beads, and UV resin. I did it on the back of a silicone mold, so it would not stick to the surface. I added beads on the underside so I could secure them to the bodysuit. Big emphasis on the I was planning part because I ended up using only a few of these. I was having a lot of thoughts about the turtleneck and I decided that maybe the necklace would help it stop looking bleh. So I started sewing in this bead chain to cover the transition between the lace and the mesh. It didn't help, so I cut the lace off. I started adding the necklace components, but I was having second thoughts again, so I decided to move on with other things and not spend too much on things that weren't working out exactly like I envisioned. I turned one of the stones into an engagement ring, and now the whole big necklace concept was out of the window. I started drawing out a harness to complement the sheer bodysuit and to fit our kinky seductress. After getting the concept right, I started cutting out some strips out of a red PU leather. I'm going to connect them with a lot of rings and a lot of rivets. I made this up as I went, adding strips to the rings, putting them against the doll, and marking the placement of another ring, and trying to keep it symmetrical. I made the main underboob belt, then added the cups and straps. I made another belt for the bottom part and kept adding to it. I used a reference for the bottom from a website called Gothic Babe. I found that name a little funny. A lot funny, actually. Now back to the necklace. I didn't have any more cheap bead chains, only this one that I actually wear, so to avoid cutting into it, I just piled it on the doll as is. I used one of the gems to finish the necklace. The bodysuit still felt empty, so I decided to embellish the crap out of it with handmade hand-sewn flowers. I cut these on the Cricut, and to add a bit of dimension to the craft foam, I pressed them on a kitchen sponge with a big round ball heated up over a candle. I added a few of these big store-bought flowers first to fill a little bit of the space. Then I would take a layer of a sparkly flower, add the foam flower on top, add a bead, and run the needle back through the flowers and into the suit. After filling in the cup, it looked a little like those pom-pom bras to me, so I decided to go all out and add a few dozen of those handmade flowers in total, plus some beads to blend it in with the empty spaces. It was a labor of love. How thematic. I added a few of the flowers to the top layer of the skirt, and the gown is finished.
For her hair, I'm going to use this beautiful warm pink blend called Marshmallow Nylon from Retro Dolls UK, now known as the Doll Hair Emporium. I hate making hair wefts from nylon hair. I prefer to reroute with nylon, but smart dolls don't have hair holes, so we need to make a wig. My method for making synthetic wefts is to have something long to secure the loose hair when I'm adding glue with a brush. This footage of making a wig cap is actually from the other idea, which we might use in the future, so I'm not going to tell you what the theme of that was. I managed to finish the wig from the suspended secret project, but I have to tell you, the one I'm making now turned out much better, if I do say so myself. I'm gluing the wefts to the wig cap using all-purpose glue starting from the bottom of the head. For the part, I wanted to try something different than cutting the wig cap in half, like I did in the Mori video and the secret project wig. I wrapped the weft in cardboard and press it with a hair straightener. The nylon fiber is very stubborn, so the only way to force it to stay in place is to use heat. This is what I have after the heat treatment, a bent weft that can be glued to the cap. I'm gluing a small strand to the front to cover the ugly part. I want to keep the hair long, so I'm only trimming the ends and the front.
It's shoes time! I know I promised you a shoe tutorial in the Mori video, and this is not the shoe tutorial I was talking about, though it is a shoe tutorial, so I guess everything's good, right? I made a heel for the shoes first, because it's going to take some time to cure. I 3D modeled the heel, printed it, and made a silicone mold, and now I'm going to be casting 3 different versions, because I don't have time for retakes anymore, so we're gonna have backup and backup of the backup, all at the same time. I'm splitting the resin into 2 cups, and I will color one with black ink. I poured one solid black pear, one black with clear, and one with heart-shaped iridescent glitter, because those were the 3 ideas that came to my head. The glitter sunk to the bottom, the black ones were boring, so I ended up polishing the 50-50 idea, which, yes you guessed it, I had to repour anyway, because my mold had a hole in one crevice and it was the crevice of the design that I liked. Continuing with the leather, I made a sandal with some strips and rivets, but I had to make my own ring this time because the ones I had left were too small. Now we need some soles. I cut 2 pairs, one of cardboard and one out of thick craft foam. The cardboard is glued onto some black cotton. I cut around the cardboard with my pinking shears so it will be easier to turn it to the underside. If you don't have pinking shears, just cut out a zigzag with normal scissors. I'm folding the teeth one by one to make sure I have a smooth edge. I pressed it to make sure it's flat, but to really make sure, I hammered it down as well. To add a bit of stability to the soles, I'm cutting out an insert out of a beverage can. It's a few millimeters smaller than the sole because I wanted to make sure that in case the glue wouldn't hold onto the metal, at least it would be sandwiched between the cardboard and the foam. Using an epoxy glue, I joined the cardboard side with the metal. I used sewing clips as clamps for this. Now we can bend the soles into shape and start gluing the straps on. I marked out the position and using the same epoxy glue, I stuck it to the underside of the sole. I repeated that on the other strap as well and decided to add an ankle strap. I again just measured it on the doll's foot and glued it in place. We can now hide this mess by adding the foam as the outer sole. I had a little bit of trouble clamping this in place as I didn't want to damage the foam by the pressure of the sewing clips. I added the heels, still with the epoxy glue. And as a last touch, I added some of the necklace gems I made to the sides.
Succubusses are demons, and this demon needs a tail. I'm twisting a wire to have a stronger base and making a little cute heart at the end. I couldn't stop myself from making at least one thing from iridescent vinyl. This material is life. I sandwiched the wire with 2 pieces of vinyl and pressed it with a hair straightener. I wrapped the wire with medical tape, painted it red, and glued a bit of brushed yarn to add volume. Then I decided to torture myself by cutting scales by hand and gluing one by one to the tail. We want to be able to remove the tail from the body, so I'm going to add a magnet to the tail and the doll's back from inside. If you haven't noticed, this whole tail is made from medical tape, so a few more layers can't do any harm. To add some more colors, I painted a fade from light pink to burgundy. Demons also need horns. I wanted to use another neodymium magnet as they are small and strong, but I used the last 4 for the Suspended Secret project, and the only store that has them in our town had some sort of breakdown and was closed. I needed the magnets ASAP because the deadline was close and I couldn't risk the waiting time of an online order, so I decided to look for other magnets in our house. I found my old magnetic hoop that I use very rarely and decided to thrift some of the magnets from there. They work, but are not as strong, so I used 2 for each side. I made an armature from a wire and hot glue, and then the hero of this video, the medical tape, came back to make this custom great again. I used it to add volume and to use less epoxy sculpt later on, so the horns won't be too heavy. I added the clay in 2 parts, first close to the head, and then after a few hours I covered the remaining part. I painted the horns red, and this is where the second torture begins. I don't know why I did it to myself, but I decided to cover both horns with the same foam scales as a tail. Somewhere in the middle of the horns I decided to ask Barb to cut the scales on the cricut. They turned out like this, and after being painted, I really liked them. As a last detail, I wanted to make some hair accessories. I made a simple pin with a flower, strands of beads and smaller flowers. The bottom side is not that pretty, so I'm painting it with black paint. And with that, she should be ready.
This is how she turned out. Crush was a complicated project. Between the staining, changing concepts and deadlines, there was quite a bit of pressure to make her on time. But she's here, looking gorgeous as ever, and ready to be taken to the altar to say the eternal yes to her beloved partner.
I must say, I'm quite smitten with this sultry goddess. To see my sweet unicorn bride fable, check out the video on my channel. Thanks so much for collaborating with me, Barb and Alex.
And thank you for collaborating with us! Who do you think a flirty succubus-like crush is marrying? Is it the devil himself, or did she find love with someone from heaven? Let us know in the comments down below.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram for some sneak peeks and subscribe for future videos. Have an enchanted Valentine's Day, and we'll see you next time. Bye! And ready to be taken to the altar to say the eternal yes to her beloved partner. Unlike us.
That's true.